On the 1st of October in 331 BCE, Alexander the Great was faced with a reconstituted but ginormous army under Darius, the king of the Medes and of the Persians. They were camped on the plain, in fact deployed now in battle formation, on the plain of Galgamela. Darius had already seen defeat twice to this young lad from Macedonia. He'd seen defeat at the Battle of the Granicus River, which was really just a skirmish with his satraps who thought they could handle the young upstart. And then the Battle of Issus, where the full royal army had deployed against Alexander when it was seen that his attempt on the Medo-Persian Empire had really materialised into, a full campaign, and he was in danger. And of course, at that battle, he'd actually seized the family, his wives and so on. From Darius, Alexander had held them in, treated them well and so on, and offered to return them with an honour guard and so on, because he was an honourable man. But now, things had got real. Alexander had taken some time off. He had a year or so, really given Darius time to regroup and see if he could rewrite the wrong, to see if he could finally beat Alexander on the field of battle. But Alexander hadn't wasted his time. No, he'd gone south. He'd conquered all the cities in Judea, Palestine, all the way down into Egypt. He'd conquered, in fact, the Egyptians, who were under the Medo-Persian yoke, had welcomed him as a liberator. And Alexander was happy to be their liberator as long as he got their grain. And during that time, he'd made a special trek all the way across the desert, westward, toward the Siwa Oasis. Now, they had various oracles in Greece. They had the Oracle of Delphi, Mount Parnassus, where a lady would inhale the fumes that came up from the temple of Apollo there, and she would prophesy in various riddles, and then it would be interpreted kind of how you wanted it to interpret. So, you couldn't really fail to win when you heard a prophecy from the Oracle of Delphi. But Siwa Oasis, the one that Alexander was trekking to across the desert, that was a little different. And it was such a dangerous trek going across the desert there with his little contingent of bodyguards that he nearly died because they got lost. And it was only because, miraculously, some might say, they saw a flock of birds flying down. They thought, well, if there are birds living there, there must be water. And so they reached the Siwa Oasis, and there the priest greeted Alexander as the son of Re, the sun god. Maybe it was a mistranslation because he didn't speak Egyptian. It was being translated into Greek. But either way, from that point, he probably believed it before, but certainly from that point, it seems his belief was solidified that he was in fact the son of the sun god, Re. And he spent some time there at the Siwa Oasis, received the blessing, was anointed as the new pharaoh of Egypt, and of course that ushered in the Ptolemaic period of Egyptian rule that would last until, Cleopatra and Mark Antony, a long time in the future. But anyway, he'd made his way back. So Darius had had time to regroup, reconstitute his army. And in fact, he chose the place where this battle would commence, on the plain of Galgamela. It means something like the cowshed or something. It's not a glorious name. He got his engineers to flatten out land and make sure it was perfect for a battle, because he didn't want his scythe chariots to tumble over in the rocky ground. And so the last job that his engineers did for him was to prepare the ground. It was separated by, I guess in the Middle East you call it a wadi, but this is further than the Middle East, this is further east. But a dry riverbed anyway. So there's a demarcation line between where Darius' army would stand and where Alexander's army would stand. And they reached it. And they reached it, in fact, in the mid-afternoon. And Parmenio, who was the commander of the Thessalian cavalry, the cavalry from all around the region of Thessaly in northern Greece, which is was known for its wonderful cavalry, and around there, Parmenio was counselling Alexander and saying, we need to wait till tomorrow. We need a full day to deal with this enemy, because indeed the Medo-Persian army was large. It had people from all across the Medo-Persian Empire. The religion of the Medo-Persian Empire was a very tolerant one, and the rule was light and it was kind. We know that the Second Temple, after the Babylonian destruction of the Jewish temple at Jerusalem, it was money that was raised from the Medo-Persians that paid for the rebuilding of the temple and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. So they knew how to look after their client states, and every satrap had a responsibility. A satrap is just a governor of one of the regions of Medo-Persia. They had a duty to raise a certain number of troops, and because it was so large, this empire, they had a wonderful toolbox, really, of different troops. People who could sling stones, people who could throw javelins, people that could ride horses really well, people who could fight with the sword, people that could fight on horseback. They had a great panoply, a great variety of troops, a real toolbox, and the army was large. Of course, we don't know how large it was because records are not good from that time. Alexander, though, had a small army that was very battle-hardened. He had, obviously, the way the Macedonians fought, the way they'd conquered all of Greece and united it in this great campaign against Medo-Persia, they had always used their phalanx, the Greek phalanx. So these were tough, sturdy mountain men, mainly from Macedonia, with 16-foot-long sarissas, which are great long stabbing spears, 16-foot long. You had to hold them with two hands. You couldn't really have a shield with them. And their great strength was when they were in perfect cohesion, when they were stuck together. The moment it got fragmented, you were stuffed, because imagine getting inside, fighting someone with a 16-foot hole. Not much chance there if you're broken up into individual combat. Although they probably had a few knives and whatnot on them as well. But it was keeping that phalanx together. That was how they would fight. And it was a terrifying thing when it moved in perfect unison and came towards you, all these spears pointing out. And several battles were decided just by the commanders ordering the phalanx to change position, how they would in unison raise their spears, turn around, put them down again, and point them towards the enemy. And the enemy, as I say, several times just were like, yeah, all right, we surrender, because they knew it. They didn't have a chance against this thing. Like a great iron hedgehog. But anyway, so Parmenio, the commander of the cavalry, the Thessalian cavalry, he said we should leave it till tomorrow. But Alexander the Great said, no, we'll go for it tonight. It's caused a lot of debate, this. Why did he say, no, we'll attack, today? Even though it was, afternoon, it's going to get dark fairly soon. Some have said, well, Alexander wanted to just get on with the battle and win. Others have said, well, if we lose, it's going to be dark, so we can probably get away and regroup and have another go tomorrow. It won't be a crushing victory where they chase us from dawn till dusk and kill a lot of us. So Alexander maybe was hedging his bets there by going for it late in the evening, because he knew it would be a formidable task. His great strength, though, as well, despite having the phalanx, was his companion cavalry. And this would be on the right wing of the army, whereas the Thessalian cavalry would be on the left. And the companion cavalry were basically Alexander's mates. They're the people he'd grown up with, the young lads, up from Pella in Macedonia, for the most part. People they got hunting together. They were skilled horsemen, and they were all noblemen. So there weren't that many of them, I don't know, maybe a few thousand, but probably not more than that. But they're all fit, athletic young men, and they packed a great punch. And indeed, that was what had won most of Alexander's previous battles. The phalanx had held the enemy in position. They'd been slowly advancing, and the enemy was being fixed. And then Alexander would crash into them with his companion cavalry. Indeed, at the Battle of Granicus River, the first battle, one of his companions, Clytus the Black, had actually lopped off the arm of an attacking Persian who was just about to deal a death blow to Alexander. That's how close. That's the risks Alexander was taking. He would lead these companion cavalry. He wasn't a commander standing behind them. Just a quick aside to the First World War, we had around 100 generals killed in action. So never let it be said they're in chateaus, which is a common, disgraceful myth that's still put about. No, we lost 100 or so in action, and another 100 or so wounded. But anyway, Alexander would be there leading from the front. And yes, Clytus the Black saved Alexander's life. It was acknowledged. Sadly, later on, after Alexander was king over all of Greece and Medo-Persia and Egypt, and had pressed on into India and so on, he, in a drunken rage, would kill with his own hand Clytus the Black. That is to say, he grabbed a spear off somebody after Clytus the Black had said that something, basically a reference to his father, because he respected Philip II, his father, in this insult more than he respected Alexander, because Alexander was trying to woo all the Medo-Persians, whereas Philip II just hated them, wanted to kill them, and Clytus the Black wasn't happy with this wooing, and Alexander grabbed a spear off a guard and skewered Clytus the Black, and that was the end of him. Nice way to repay the dude that saves your life. But anyway, that's a digression. So as the battle commenced, the phalanx, as always, began marching forward toward this vast horde that was against the Medo-Persian Empire. It had to go across the dry riverbed that I mentioned, and it lost some cohesion. And there were casualties being taken, because obviously if everyone's scrambling down the bank and scrambling up another with these 16-foot long spears, it's very hard to stay in perfect formation. And they didn't, but they were still organised enough to maintain it. But they did suffer losses. The Thessalian cavalry were hard pressed on the left. Parmenio fought a great delaying action, but he was forced back a long way. And of course, the danger of the phalanx is if you get caught in the flank, if people come in from the side, you'll just be butchered. And so Parmenio was trying to avoid that, trying to protect the left flank of the phalanx. But he was struggling. He was really struggling. He sent off messages to Alexander, like, send people to help me. I'm in trouble here. But Alexander, all this time, he'd been doing something different. He'd been using misdirection. What he'd been doing, he'd been moving the companion cavalry further right, further right, further right. And in doing so, he was dragging across one of Darius's best lieutenants, who was in charge of a large contingent of cavalry, to try and shadow him, basically. But in doing so, he managed to pull the army apart a little of Darius and make a gap. And then suddenly, all at once, in a wedge-shaped formation, his cavalry, companion cavalry, charged in, and they butchered their way all the way through. And he knew exactly what he was going for, Alexander. He was going to do exactly what he did at Issus, and he was going to go for the king himself, Darius. And they charged in, people falling left and right. And what did Darius do? He fled the battlefield. And of course, as soon as that happened, his whole army began to melt. Alexander had to send around some of the companion cavalry to take those that were threatening Parmenio in the rear. And of course, then they either surrendered or died. And why do I mention all of this when I'm talking about Usyk versus Joshua? Well, I think that Usyk is something like Darius the Mede, because he's got the full toolbox. He really does have everything. But the one thing he doesn't have is the companion cavalry, and that's the strong punch. They had nothing like it. The they had they had sort of proto knights, if you will. Some people that did have a bit of armor, but they didn't have the high back saddle that you could ride on, and lance people with. Alexander's companion cavalry, with their long lances and swords as well, that they could use for close range action, and highly trained, highly skilled at dealing that death blow. Whereas most of Darius' soldiers were very lightly armoured. They had like sort of wicker shields, things that would actually be pierced by weapons, by steel weapons. So talking about Usyk versus Joshua 2. Usyk has, as we said, the full toolbox. He's got the stamina in the same way, Darius could have carried on fighting for days. He had so many men. So could Usyk. I'm sure he could easily do 15 rounds once he gets going. He seems to have incredible levels of endurance. If Joshua, and then changing the analogy, if Joshua was a FIFA player, you know how you get that kind of diamondy, hexagon, whatever it is, that shape that indicates your skills. He's got big punch, reasonable ring IQ, reasonable movement, reasonable combinations. But Usyk would be a much fatter shape because he has everything. He has the defense, the offense, stamina, the foot movement, and he's a southpaw to make it even more tricky. A left-footed footballer. He's got the lot. But Joshua does have a couple of things that are in his advantage. Those sarissas, they were 16 foot long. Joshua does have the reach advantage here. He's considerably taller, very long arms. Just thinking when I was looking at that, the weigh-in today, how long his arms are. But of course, his combination punching and the sheer power of his punches, and not just his right cross, his left hook as well, his uppercut. Remember what the uppercut did to Dillian White, or did to Klitschko. He's got all these skills, but he has to use them. He needs to have tactics. Alexander went into that battle, as I say, fairly late in the day, but he knew exactly what he was doing. The way he was slowly moving his cavalry across, just deliberately to make an opening so his wedge-shaped formation could go in and he could go straight for the heart of the army. It's the same with Joshua. He can't just charge in there and run at Usyk and throw crazy combinations, because Usyk will duck, dodge, make him pay, dance around, and then Joshua will be spent. And Joshua will get knocked out. So this idea he needs to go in like Chisora in the first round or two is obviously a nonsense. It's not going to work that way. He needs to have a clear game plan. What can he do to cause gaps in Usyk's defence, like Alexander did? He can target other areas of the body, not just the head. The head's on a swivel constantly with Usyk. Look how he's moving his head. Try and lead with power punches. Try and hit him in the chest, in the body. When he tries to spin off, hook him. But most importantly with all of that is that, remember with Alexander, he was taking losses. The phalanx was quite badly mauled when he was crossing that dry riverbed. Parmenio was crying out for help because he was getting pressed so hard on Alexander's left flank. He was retreating. So Joshua is going to need to be prepared to take some punches, not bite on every feint. He may need to lose some rounds, but he may need, one way he had success, actually, if you look at the first fight, was backing off, letting Usyk try and pressure him and say, no, you've got to come to me. And then when Usyk thinks he's having success, land that heavy blow. And then, remember with Alexander, the moment that gap was just wide enough and the battle was teeter on the brink. If Parmenion had collapsed on the left, Darius' army would have just gone into the phalanx and mauled it. And that was the end of Alexander, and his whole campaign and world history would be different. He timed it just right. He allowed Parmenion to take damage, but still maintain his defensive line, and then he went for it. And that may be what Joshua needs to do. That he may need to bide his time, may need to lose some rounds. It may look like he's getting a little bit beat up in there, but then save his energy when it comes to it. Unleash those combinations, unleash that fire and that fury. And this is key. In the first fight, when he hurt Usyk, because he was wasting so much energy, biting on every feint, ducking down, jumping around, bouncing around, when he hurt Usyk, he was happy to accept a clinch. We can't have that tomorrow night. When there is the slightest semblance of Usyk being a little bit rocked by something, hit him again. And if he looks more rocked, hit him again. He needs to capitalise. I know it's hard to judge. I'm not a boxer. Usyk has a very good poker face. So how do you know when he's really hurt? I think Joshua needs to know that. And I think he should know. He's fought enough now. When he hurts Usyk, he needs to go in for the kill. What are Usyk's survival skills like? We've seen him dropped in the amateurs from a body shot. We've seen it hurt a few times, and he's clinched and got out of it. I don't know if he's under a barrage of shots and he's feeling dazed. Will he be able to get up again? We don't know. We'll have to see if that happens or not. The most important thing, though, in Alexander's win at Gaugamela in 331 BC, 1st of October, it was that he believed he was God by this point, because he'd gone to Siwa Oasis. He'd been named Pharaoh, who was God on earth, and he believed he was the son of the sun god. So he went in there believing he couldn't die. He couldn't lose. He was anointed by God. Now, that would be somewhat deluded. Probably only Deontay Wilder would claim something like that. But Joshua needs to go in there with absolute confidence that he will win. He needs to have one purpose in mind, in my opinion, knocking out Alexander Usyk, and believing that his companion cavalry, his heavy weaponry, can go for the heart of Usyk and can stop him. And indeed it can. It really can in heavyweight boxing. But he'll need to go through a lot of tribulation to get there. As well, don't think this particularly relates to Alexander the Great and stuff, but the foot movement of Usyk. Usyk is so fast in dodging sideways, getting out the way, moving around, whereas Joshua tends to back up in straight lines, not so nimble on his feet at all as Usyk. You've got to try and, if possible, limit his movement. So maybe Joshua again should retreat to the ropes to try and lure Usyk in, get him to walk onto a shot, and then spin him round. If you can get the dude in a corner where he can't get out, I mean, look how Klitschko was trapped by Joshua in that 11th round. If he's clever like that and puts him in a tactically difficult position, even Tony Bellew was doing it, where he would back up to the ropes deliberately, because if you get Usyk to the side of him, he knew that Usyk couldn't spin off in the direction of the ropes. He'd have to spin off the other way. And that limited his options because he could see that foot speed and that nimbleness. And Joshua may need to do this. So there's certainly ways that Joshua can win. And I think the most important thing is that he's prepared to take some punches. We'll see. Look, if I had to say what Joshua's biggest weakness is, I wouldn't say his chin. It would have to be his stamina. And so he may need to test that chin a little bit against a blown-up cruiserweight, let's not forget, who can bang a bit. But Joshua may need to be prepared to take some shots in order to give back some much harder shots. So Joshua can win it, but in terms of my prediction, unfortunately, I don't believe that Joshua has the confidence to stick to a game plan that means he might lose some rounds and get a bit beat up. My suspicion is he will go in there with more energy and more aggression, and he may have some success. I think he may well drop Usyk, or at least hurt Usyk fairly badly over the first 4 or 5 rounds. The problem is, I think Usyk is a very wily campaigner, and he does have survival skills. He's got a chin, and I can see him coming back stronger than ever, despite being hurt. Whereas Joshua, I see, once he's shot his bolt, it's like that companion cavalry go for their charge, but Darius instead calls up his immortals, which are his kind of bodyguard. They're called the Immortals because every time you killed one, it seemed another one appeared. I don't think they did really, but that was what they were called, the Immortals, because it looked like they just rose up from the dead whenever they were killed. It'd be like him calling up his Immortals and say, hey, sort that lot out. And then Alexander and his mates getting slaughtered. It would have required moral fortitude to do that, which Darius didn't have. Joshua, I fear, will have this success. He may hurt Usyk a fair bit, maybe put him down early, but I think Usyk will just rally around, because to me he's mentally much stronger. IQ-wise, I'm sure he's far higher, boxing IQ and IQ in the real world. And Joshua will have expended so much energy that he'll become like a punching bag. I don't see him quitting, though. I really don't see him quitting. I think he's too tough for that. It may be the corner throwing in the towel. It may be he's been knocked over so many times the referee stops it. But I see him by, let's say, the 9th round. I see it being over, being stopped, and it being Usyk's win. And Slava Ukraina, unfortunately, because I want Joshua to win. But yeah, that's how I see it. Let me know how you think. I better end this video now. But yeah, looking forward to it. It's going to be good tomorrow. But I fear it won't be a happy outcome. But hey, I'd love to be surprised. I'd love to see Joshua turn it over. Because we've already listened to an interview with Deontay Wilder, and he clearly has no appetite for fighting Usyk. You tell that from this interview. The only chance we've got of like a proper unification is, well, I don't really know now. Actually, the WBC being stripped is going to be held hostage by Wilder probably forever. So yeah, I'd like to see the Tyson Fury Joshua fight, which I think will happen if Joshua wins. But anyway, Benjo out.